Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, the show that is part of the Simply Luxurious Life online destination, cultivating true contentment, the art of living a life of quality over quantity. Visit the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life, at our simplified URL, tsll.co or thesimplyluxuriouslife.com to find the show notes for each podcast episode, as well as much more weekly content to elevate your everyday and deepen your contentment. From a Monday motivational post, recipes, videos of the cooking show series, style and decor inspiration, French and British inspired content, and readers' favorite regular weekly post, This and That, which is posted each Friday morning. Now to today's episode. Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. And whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Talking about the French language, and we're continuing a series that I technically began back in 2016, but the most recent episode aired this past February when I shared part 4 of What Have I Learned in French Class So Far. Today is part 5, or part 5, and I have 13 lessons, ahas, discoveries, I can be fluent enough to communicate on my travels when I get the opportunity to travel to France. Okay. Now, part of the reason I wanted to bring this episode to you today is because when May arrives on the blog and here on the podcast, we're gearing up for all things British. Yep, the third full week of May is always the Simply Luxurious Life's annual British Week. And because of that, we are making sure we haven't forgotten about our love for France. I'll talk a little bit more about some awesome things that are taking place exclusively this month that gear us up for British Week. But before I do, let's get into today's episode. What I've learned so far in French class, part 5. N'ayez pas peur. I want to begin with that statement, n'ayez pas peur, which simply means have no fear, because it is one of the lessons we just started to learn as French 104 began on Monday. Now, these are the formal lessons. These are actual courses that I take online via Zoom through the Washington, D.C.'s branch of Alliance des Françaises, as I've shared before. So I won't go into all the details as to why I have enrolled in these courses on this episode. If you want to learn all the specifics of what I hope to achieve, why I want to learn, and all those details, please listen to episode 349. We continue on into the wilderness and beauty of the French language, or should I say langue française. And yep, we have just, as I mentioned in that passage, dove into learning the imperative form. And as the command directs, have no fear, which is a great place to start, because when we choose to learn a new language, especially as an adult, and anyone proficient in any field other than the French language, if it's new to them, humility must be brought with us on the journey. To trip over any new language we wish to learn, or any new skill for that matter, is a practice in being vulnerable. And being vulnerable is scary. It's scary to try to form the words and say them out loud, even if we have practiced and know the alphabet of that new language. It is scary to bravely raise our hand and attempt to answer a question when we know the answer may be a direct and frank no, from the professor. And it is scary to keep raising our hand, to keep speaking a new language after we have mispronounced and incorrectly answered in the past, which is why it is imperative, pun intended, to hold this directive with us as we choose to learn. Have no fear. After all, what is there to be afraid of, really? This is when we need to set our ego aside, take the many corrections from the professor, and just keep trying. Just keep speaking, and gradually, ever so gradually, improvements and a depth of understanding as our long-term memory begins to hold this new language in its arsenal of knowledge that it draws upon when we least expect it to be easy to grasp, the new language becomes easier. I share these words of encouragement for you, readers and listeners of the blog and podcast, as much as I say them for myself, because it is a slow journey. But all of a sudden, I will find myself in moments grasping and understanding what to say and how to say it, when in the past, such an occurrence would never have happened. And it is in these moments I know that the regular effort, vulnerability, and bravery, and mental exhaustion are worth it and are paying off. Today we return to the series, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, of what I have learned so far in French class. And this journey started in 2016. And it is continuing on as I began French 104 just a couple days ago, after beginning French 101 in September 2022. But again, I talk about all the previous French classes and lessons I've had prior to 2022 in episode 349. So if you want to go back to that post or episode, I've provided the link in the show notes to do so. But a brief refresher, because part 4 or part 4 brought us to the midway point of French 102. So the last episode brought us midway through 102, a class and a half through. And today's episode will focus on what I've learned as French 102 concluded, and all of French 103, and the first day of French 104. All right. Admittedly, French 103 was when I felt I was in brand new territory, as up to 102, I had a clear awareness of present tense, the numbers, basic get to know you phrases, and just the familiarity phrases, hello, goodbye, things like that. And I had been exposed to those components that were being taught, but I just needed to polish them up, as there were a few fundamental gaps, such as the proper pronunciation of the entire alphabet, that I needed to fix and learn. So now I am in the thick of all new knowledge, and my head is exhausted each week, following each day of classes, which are 2 each week for 2 hours each time. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a look at this list of what I have learned so far in French class. Number 1, the mental exhaustion improves or lessens over time. As I shared a minute ago, when French 103 began, and it was with a new professor, I had taken the first 2 courses with another professor, she had high expectations, and she used every single minute of the class. And I'm still with her in French 104 because of this. My mind was exhausted. Not only was this primarily new content to me, but it was also nonstop and just keeping us on task. No pauses in talking in English. It was all the way for 2 hours. And I loved it. And that's why I signed up for her class again. She's not easy, but she knows her stuff. So yes, my mind was exhausted. However, that was the worst of it. In other words, my mind was working in a way it had not before, and therefore had to get in shape, so to speak, by being stretched in a way it hadn't stretched before. Now, yes, I still have mental fatigue, and I will continue, I know, to have mental fatigue. But part of me is used to it. But the other part of me knows my mind, as it pertains to learning the French language, is getting better toned and used to searching, remembering, and applying the new knowledge. And this is all the more reason to hang in there and keep attending class, keep signing up for the next class, and don't think that any little bit of effort won't help, because it does. So that's number 1. And I start there to remind myself, but also to let you know, if you're going through any journey that you're teaching your mind something new, you're not always going to feel that super fatigued the entire way. But this is ultimately much like the universe going, do you really want it? Do you really want it? But it is only temporary. And it's worth it because your brain is sitting there going, what do you want me to do? This is new. And it's just configuring itself. It's figuring out what you want it to do. All right, so that's number one. Number two, être, avoir, savoir, and vouloir are the only verbs that are irregular in the imperative form. Imperatif form, I should say. As I hinted above with that opening quote, n'ayez pas peur. We've begun to learn the imperative form and how it functions. And it is really quite simple, especially when I discovered, and it makes sense logically, that there are only ever 3 forms of the imperative for conjugation, because you're giving a command to someone. You're telling them to do something. So it's always in the tu, nu, or vous form. So the tu informal and singular, and we form, and tu formal and plural form. And so long as you know your present tense forms of all the verbs and memorize the 4 new irregular forms of être, which means to be, avoir, which means to have, savoir, to know, and vouloir, which means to want, you know how to properly use, speak, and write the imperative. But really quickly, as I mentioned briefly, but I just want to make sure we're clear on this, what is the imperative? The exact same thing that imperative is in the English language, a command or direction given with an understood subject. So instead of beginning a sentence with a subject, you begin with a verb that is conjugated. And that's as simple as that. I mean, I asked a question in class recently. I said, I just wanted to clarify this. I said, so all the other forms of imperative beyond these 4 are the same conjugation as the present. And She fine-tuned the answer to my question, but essentially yes. So I just need to bulk up my memorization of a variety of verbs in the present tense forms. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, I learned how to communicate time properly, both formally and informally. Now this may seem like a simple concept, and it is, but knowing how to form a sentence when asked the time is slightly different than it is in English. But it is still simple. The key is to remember to, once you begin speaking the time formally, and that would be, for example, military time, you just need to continue to do so. What I mean by that is you wouldn't start off by saying, il est 8h30. So et demi is the colloquial or informal way of speaking time. Instead, you would say, il est 8h30. Minute. You could say minute or not. It's up to you. But you would speak the numbers. So formal is speaking the numbers and in military time. So you don't have to designate morning or evening because it's military time. And there are no phrases whatsoever, only numbers. And when you speak the informal or informel, then you can use those common phrases such as midi, which is noon, or minuit, which is midnight, or moins la quart, which is less than a quarter, so 15 before the hour, or 8 o'clock minus 15, so technically 7:45, or demi, which is half past. In other words, once you start speaking it in one way, you have to finish it. You don't want to mix them up. That's number 3. Number 4, what liaison and enchaînement are as they pertain to pronunciation in the French language. Now, these are both large, odd words, but all they are, and they are very important if we want to pronounce the language correctly, is terms that refer to how the sound of the word changes due to the other words around it. Let me give you examples and teach you these terms. So enchaînement, so spelled E-N-C-H-A-I-N-E-M-E-N-T. So what I'll do is give you the how this affects the language and how the pronunciation has changed. So it's just changing the pronunciation of the words compared to what they would sound like if you said them on their own. So what is affected in enchaînement? Words that begin with H or a vowel, so that's silent H, so to speak. How is the pronunciation changed? Well, if the word that precedes the word that begins with the H or vowel ends in a consonant sound, then the speaker must combine the words and drop the last consonant sound of the first word, combining the sounds into one. So for example, if I'm trying to say 9 hours, so 9 is 9. And by itself, you say neuf, and you hear that F at the end because there's a letter F at the end. And the second word is meaning hours. But together, if I say them together, you would say neuf. Notice I'm not saying the F. Why? Because the second word begins with an H. And so then I change the last sound of the first word because it's a consonant and get rid of it. So neuf instead of neuf. That would be incorrect. And I've written this out on the show notes if you want to check those out with the proper pronunciation in brackets. I am a student in these classes. I am not professing to know how to pronounce everything correctly. So this is my effort in just showing what I've learned. Liaison is when words that end with a vowel sound and the next word begins with a vowel or H. You change the pronunciation because you pronounce the consonant of the first word that previously had not been pronounced. So for example, let's use time again. I'm going to say 3 hours. So I would say 3 heures. Again, those are separate. 3. That's how you say 3 by itself, even though it ends in an S, so consonant, right? But I don't pronounce that consonant in French. The last consonant is never pronounced. Heure begins with an H. So alone, I do not say the S. I put those together because heure begins with an H. I do pronounce that S, and a single S sounds like the buzzing of a bee. So you would say 3 heures, 3 heures. Now, if you have a double S, that's the more of the snake sound. So there's a differentiation just in sounds. Double S is a snake sound. 1 S is a buzzing bee. Anyway, so that is how the sound changes based on the words around a word that begins with H or a vowel. Okay, so there's a mini lesson in pronunciation, and I hope I didn't butcher it too badly. Number 5, we learned in French 103 how to construct passé composé. And passé composé in English is simply past tense. And this was a big step for me in my learning journey of the French language. And I was so assumptive that the passé composé was just super, super difficult. Man, was I wrong. Yes, it will require a lot of memorization as far as just words and spellings, but it's not difficult in its construction. Now, I won't teach the entire lesson. Don't worry. The key here is knowing that every single conjugated verb will be preceded by one of 2 verbs, either être, and you would conjugate that into its form for I, you, we, us, whatever the subject is, or avoir, again, conjugated for its form. And then, how do you decide which one? Well, it's actually fairly simple. There are only about 15 out of all the verbs in the French language, 15 verbs that are associated with être. And the rest are all with avoir. So, as one student said, when in doubt, go with avoir. True, but you can memorize these 15, and I've included them on today's show notes, and I'll read them off to you. But an easy way to remember which verbs go with être is that they either describe a change of state or describe a motion, so movement. Now, it's important to note that not every verb that involves motion or a change of state uses être, only the 15 in this list. But if you look at the 15, this will just keep you straight as, oh yeah, that's a motion, that's a change of state, that's why that goes there. Let me read them off to you. So, entre, to enter, sortir, to exit or to go out, monter, to go up, to climb, descendre, to descend. Notice how these are movements, right? You're either entering or leaving. You're going up or you're going down. So they would use être. Passer, to go or to pass. Restir, to remain or to stay. That verb is really important to note that it doesn't mean you're taking a nap. It is slightly, if not a lot different in my opinion, to you're staying somewhere, you're not moving, but at the same time, you're not taking a nap. There's a different term for that entirely. So even though that one's not a change of motion, it's the lack of motion, I guess is why it fits in this one. Retourner or tourner, so any verb that on this list that has the same root form would be considered part of the list, which means to return or turn. Tomber, to fall out or to fall. Arriver, to arrive or to reach. Partir, to leave or to depart. Aller, to go. So if you're trying to tell someone you went somewhere, that one is used a lot. Venir, revenir, devenir, to come back or to become. Naître, to be born. Mourir, to die. And because it's similar to mourir, décédé means to be deceased. That one is also included in this list. So you have technically 16, but 15 verbs, and all of them are associated in passé composé with être. The rest, everything else, goes with avoir. And what do I mean by they go with these two verbs? Well, once you figure out whether it's être or avoir and you've conjugated it to the subject, then this is what gave me a huge relief, was that what follows is the verb that you're trying to say. So if you say, I went dancing, you would say, je suis allé danser. Je suis allé danser. And because it ends in an ER, danser ends in an ER, all ER verbs, unless they're irregular, end with an E accent aigu. So an accent that goes up and to the right. So je suis allé danser. That's it. Even if it was we went out dancing, it would still be danser. If it was they went out dancing, it would still be danser. So that doesn't change based on the subject. So I have included a list or a picture of my notes as I was trying to memorize the most commonly used verbs and all their endings. The verbs that end in U, the verbs that end in I, the verbs that end in E, accent aigu. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. But the key thing is, it's not as complicated as I thought. If you've been intimidated by what passé composé is, as long as you have these fundamental basics straight in your mind, you'll be able to conjugate anything into the past tense. So that's number 5, how to construct passé composé. Number 6, speaking of passé composé, since it's now easier than I thought, it gives me so much more flexibility in constructing phrases. So it is worth reiterating this again. What I thought prior to learning what passé composé was and how to do it was incorrect. I just needed to be taught by someone who knew the language. Once I had this knowledge, great progress in communicating was made and is made, and ease has been experienced, knowing that I could share what I had done in conversation, whatever that may be. All right, that's number 6. Number 7, positive encouragement and praise are wonderfully powerful, no matter what the student's age. It has been a fascinating experience being a teacher who taught for 20 years, and specifically the English language, and now stepping into someone else's classroom who is an expert on this basic subject, the fundamentals of a language that is not the one I know. And I have to keep myself in check, and it's been very healthy for me to go through this for that part too, as much as it is just to learn something new. Apart from the skills that are being taught and that I'm trying to learn, the energy and connection a teacher brings to the space with their students determines the probability of their students remaining in the class, showing up, believing they can do it, and the confidence to try. And I'm now in my 4th quarter here, and it's been interesting to see which students stay, which ones don't, which ones return, which ones are late, which ones are always on time. Of course, I don't know all the stories because I'm not the teacher, so I'm not receiving the communication behind the scenes. But I, as a teacher who, dealt with tardies and kids that would show up and wouldn't show up, and knowing all the different reasons that cause these things to happen and the connections I either had or didn't have with them, it's been interesting and enlightening, because it deepens my understanding and appreciation of this journey. And as well, it's important that I remember that every teacher is a human being. I mean, I know we know this and I know this, but that's important to keep in mind. And it's easier to notice now when my professor is exhibiting an immense amount of patience, restraint, and strength to keep us accountable. in all sorts of different situations that arise in class. And I just applaud her for keeping us focused, keeping us on task, keeping us going, holding us accountable. And I also empathize with her and try to be aware that she will have good days and not so good days. But what I also appreciate about my current professor is that she wastes not 1 minute of our class time and is determined to teach us the language. She is a dedicated professional, and that is something that is has been exhibited from the moment class began with 103. There are moments when it is also clear that teaching a lower skilled class to students such as myself, and being someone who knows the French language superbly as my professor does, that she gets a little bit, and it's not, she doesn't directly say it, but you could see it in her face and kind of in her tones. Why don't you know this? And whether through the repetition of the skills we are trying to learn that are brand new to us, her patience can sometimes be a bit lacking. And that's when I have to say she's a human being. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what class she had before us or previously. We don't know. And as a student, I know now even more clearly that in order for me to learn and feel comfortable learning, to have confidence to keep trying, even though it's really hard, I could use a bit more acknowledgement of my effort and willingness to try to speak out or try to speak. However, in those moments when I feel there's not a helpful connection, where there's an expectation I'm supposed to know something, how could I possibly have known this at this point in the game? It's a helpful exercise for me to go, Shannon, put your ego aside and dig down and choose to learn rather than take it personal, because it's not personal. She's just trying to teach you, and she is a valuable resource. After all, I can honestly say she is the best and most knowledgeable and capable of explaining the language clearly professor that I have had in my 20 plus years of trying to finally learn this beloved language. And I am grateful that these classes and the quality of these classes are available. So that's number 7, just understanding how I learn as a student, what's helpful, what's not helpful, but then trying to be more self-aware, to say, okay, why did I feel that way? What is going on in me to make me become resistant to learning? Okay, Shannon, ego, take a step back, maybe 2. And this is going to be hard, but it's possible. And step up, because you have someone here who's willing to teach you. And you're not alone. Everyone else is trying to learn this too, and it's not easy for them. Everyone's on their own journey. So that's number 7. Number 8 is that we learned, or were at least given a taste of, the le passé récent. So while we just received a taste of this and how to construct it, what it means is simply the recent past. So anything that has just happened. Seeing the formula for how to construct these phrases and knowing that it is a very simple formula, wow, that's a small boost of confidence right there. It's like, oh, okay, I just need to be introduced to this. I just need to be taught it. How are you going to know anything you've never been taught? And so just to share with you what that construction is, it is simply using the verb venir, which is to come, venir, in the present tense. So whatever the subject is in the present tense, plus de, plus the infinitive form of the action verb. That's it. Now, this reminds me that I just simply need to bulk up on my knowledge of vocabulary with a variety of verbs that I might need or use. So again, it's being reiterated again and again and again. Just bulk up your vocabulary, bulk up your vocabulary. All right, so that's number 8. Number 9. This was a big aha for me, and it equates back to our number 1 point on our list today, and I'll explain why in a minute. Hearing the language spoken first without the transcript is key to eventually and more quickly comprehending what you are hearing, even if it is more uncomfortable initially. Now, when French 103 began with my new professor, she quickly told us, gently scolding us really, to not look at the transcript, because we all have transcripts to everything we're listening to. When we were listening to passages in class that we were trying to decipher as to what they were saying. And I can remember, and I really appreciate her doing this, because I can remember in French 101 back in September being so perplexed that other students were able to easily understand. This is French 101, easily understand what was being said on the first go round of these audio recordings being shared in class. And then eventually I just said, I'm going to say something. I said, how are you all getting this so quickly? I maybe catch one word every 10 if I'm lucky. But what I didn't realize was that they were reading the transcript as they listened to what was being shared in class. And the professor had not told them we couldn't, so why wouldn't you? I mean, I knew it was there, but I generally just thought, I'm going to give this a go. And she didn't say we should look at that list, so I assumed it wasn't part of her instructions, so I left it out. I didn't do it. Now, she didn't tell us not to, so everyone was in the right to look at it. So this was not the case in 103. Our professor, her name is Olga, pointed out emphatically that if we are going to understand what we are hearing in French more quickly, we need to first hear it without peeking at the transcript, struggle with what we are hearing, and similarly to the mental fatigue that will come initially, as I mentioned in number 1, because it's so difficult initially, your brain is searching, it's brand new, it's hard, that is actually what's going to help you learn the language more quickly, more than you realize or will even be able to comprehend as possible in that moment. Needless to say, lesson learned, nobody is now looking at transcripts anymore, and we just struggle through the comprehension from the audio, and it's expected, and we just do our best. So that's number 9. Number 10. On another point of how to learn a language, just 10 minutes a day of studying every day is better than hours done sporadically. This was another tip she shared right out of the gate, Olga, and it was just to make sure that we practice at least 10 minutes a day on those days that we don't have homework or don't have class, or during our 2-week breaks in between courses. As much as it might seem, oh no, I'm going to cram 2 hours of studying in this weekend and then take the week off, it is actually counterintuitive. Just having a little dose of it every single day is a powerful difference in improving your language. So that's number 10. The best example that came to my mind with regards to this was watering a garden or a yard, especially here in Bend. Little amounts given regularly are better than no water for 2 weeks and then all of a sudden you douse it. Because if the plant hasn't had water for 2 weeks, you might have a real hard time getting it back to life, period. So it's that idea of just little gradual feedings every single day of the French language into your mind. Number 11, we learned phrases for moving a story along chronologically. So if you're in conversation and you're telling what you did today or did yesterday, or just simply telling any story, she taught us the phrases that are phrases I hear or heard all the time. And I remember hearing d'abord all the time and not knowing, this was way back in college, what the heck the professor was saying, because she just assumed I knew because it was French 102 and not French 101. Anyway, long story short, here are 5 of the phrases to move along a story chronologically. D'abord, which means first. Ensuite, further than. Puis, then. Après, after. Enfin, finally. And I've written all these out with the definitions next to them. So, phrases for moving a story along, number 11. Number 12, we learned the vocabulary for frequencies of occurrence, so la fréquence, and l'habitude, so habits, normally what you do. And the first 4 are, I'm just going to take you from 0 to 100%. Jamais means never. Parfois, sometimes. Souvent, often. Toujours, always. For habitude, l'habitude, we learned tôt, which means early. En retard, which means late. D'habitude, normally. En général, generally. And chaque, which means each. So again, little phrases that you might hear or see, and just know they are expressing frequencies of occurrence and habits or general behavior. And last but not least, number 13, is that I discovered that reflexive verbs aren't as scary as they seem. And I know this sounds silly, but if you haven't had, at least for me, if I hadn't had success with a particular term or concept in past French classes. So I'm talking back in college, even back when I took French classes at the community college here about now 7-8 years ago. These things, I just never could comprehend them. A lot of it had to do with where I was in my learning journey. A lot of it also had to do with my ability to learn and study consistently and regularly. So many other factors. So now I have more time to really focus on this one course because it's the only course I'm taking. So French 103 began with learning what reflexive verbs were and how to conjugate them and use them. And all a reflexive verb is a verb whose direct object, so that object that receives the action from the subject, is the same as the subject. So for example, to wake up. So who's receiving the action? I am. I'm waking up. So that would be se lever, Lever. And you have the se, the reflexive pronoun in front of that se. Se doucher, which is to take a shower or wash oneself. I love my autocorrect. I'm looking at my show notes and it's autocorrecting everything to English. Se brosser les dents, to brush one's teeth. Se coucher, to go to bed. Se préparer, to prepare oneself. And there are many, many, many more, but just those fundamental things that you do in the morning or in the evening to get ready for the day. Now, once I learned where the reflexive pronouns, so me, te, se, etc., went with regards in the formation of the sentence, and then where you put it when you are negating the sentence, then it was just a matter, and it still is a matter because I'm still studying, a matter of remembering which verbs are reflexive. So again, there's a lot of parts. There's still a lot of studying that I'm doing, but at least now these terms aren't so scary. And by taking the fear out of these concepts, so have no fear, right? We're back to that phrase. That actually frees me up or liberates me to keep a more open mind and build my confidence to keep learning more about this beautiful language. So that's the list, the 13 things I've learned so far in French class. And simply, I will admit, simply by writing out and sharing these lessons with you has been helpful to remember all that was covered over the past 2+ months. And now the journey continues. Of course, there is guaranteed to be times moving forward in which I scrunch my forehead up and scream inside because it isn't coming quickly or at all in that particular moment. I also know, though, that at the end of each class, I am grateful I am there. I am proud of myself for trying. And overarchingly, I am following the directive I'm going to share with you in a second. That means to have fun. Because if there is any class I would want to be enrolled in right now to learn something new, it is the French language. So I know I'm exactly where I want and need to be. So faites-vous plaisir. Have fun. Look for part 6 later in the summer this year. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Merci pour la visite. À la prochaine. Bonne journée. Actually, not bonne journée yet because we have a petit plaisir to get to. But I want to let you know that the show notes for this episode are at the blog. Can be found on the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 356. And I'll be back with a film for Francophiles. So this week's Petit Plaisir is a film I have been wanting to watch since I knew it was coming to theaters. Now, it debuted at the 2022 Toronto International Film Festival this past September. And Kelvin Harrison Jr. stars as Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who is also known, his birth name, Joseph Bologne, or Bologna. And Joseph Bologna is someone who, if you're a classical music fan, you know his music. But you probably were not aware of his music up until just as of recently, because so much of his compositions, he was a composer, he was a violin virtuoso, were destroyed by leaders of the French back during when he lived in France. And he lived in France in the 18th century. And he, by birth, was an illegitimate son of an African slave and a French plantation owner. And he's brought by his father to Paris. And again, true story. His biography is absolutely fascinating. He's brought to Paris at a young age maybe 5 or 6, to enroll in one of the most prestigious schools for boys. And there, of course, he gets picked on. He gets treated poorly by the students, but he just holds a high level of performance as his father, who is white, directed him to, knowing because of his mixed race, he would be the target of bullying. He becomes a champion fencer. He composes oodles and oodles of pieces, and he befriends the queen leading up to the French Revolution. That would be Marie Antoinette. And she is the one who gives him the name Chevalier de Saint-Georges. So Joseph Bologna wants to be the artistic director, the head of the Paris Opera, the Académie Royale de Musique. And the next director, there's a spot, and he feels he should be tapped as this. And he has the talent. He has that charisma. He has the name. I mean, he has the prestige in society. But as Marie Antoinette points out, and as we know with regards to the impending revolution, in hindsight we know is coming, we also know that her approval rating, as we call it now, is very low. And she was worried that appointing him would not do her any favors, being that he was not white. And so there was a competition, and the film follows this competition between him and another individual who was in the running, and they both had to create operas, and the judges would decide whose opera was best, and that person would become the director of the Paris Opera. And this is just butting up to right before the French Revolution, all right? And ultimately, and I'm not going to ruin the plot, there's a heartbreaking storyline at this point of his life journey. But once the French Revolution breaks out, he and his connection and relationship to Marie Antoinette is severed because of something that happens, which the film depicts. He goes on to lead the first French all-black brigade in the French Revolution. He continues on to go fight for similar causes and ends up in Haiti. Now, the film stops right before the French Revolution begins, and then you learn about the rest of it just in the epilogue of the film. Why I'm recommending this film? Well, there's so many reasons. So Kevin Harrison Jr. does a phenomenal job in this role. He actually did learn how to play the violin, or knows how to play the violin. And while it's spoken in English, I think that's the main thing it's kind of interesting to watch this set in Paris, knowing that they would be speaking French. In fact, there's a moment where Joseph Bologna's mother has returned. His mother has been freed after the death of his father. She was set free in his will. She comes to live with him in Paris, and she has a handful of friends at his place speaking, and they're speaking in her native language, Senegalese, and he says, "Mother, you must speak French. That is what we do." And he's saying this in English. It's on the nose. It's knowingly that he's saying it in English, to the point where this is for an English speaking audience to get his broader story out there to the world. So as much as we probably would want it in French, would it reach a broader audience? I don't know. If it was entirely in French, it certainly would add more credibility to the likelihood of what they were speaking. But I'm glad his story is getting out there now. And part of the reason, the larger reason as to why we don't know a lot about his music is because a lot of it was, as I said earlier, it was destroyed. And that was all intentional because Napoleon Bonaparte demanded that his work be destroyed and his name forgotten. And it wasn't until recently that some of his compositions were found. So a lot of them were burned and destroyed, never to be found, unfortunately. But thankfully, more and more have been found. And I'll include a couple on the show notes. I can't include them here on the show for copyright reasons, but I will include the YouTube video of the music so much. And it's Baroque, beautiful Baroque music. If you love classical music, absolutely stunning. Now, I do want to share that that this film opens in the most magnificent way, but it is a scene that actually never happened. But it is a way to let us know the time era in which Chevalier lived. He lived during the time of Mozart. And I will not call Chevalier the name that so many people do, because it is, I just think it's absolutely insulting in many ways, and many other reviewers do too. But the reality is they did live in the same time. They were contemporaries. They would have known about each other, if not been inspired by each other. And it is a wonderful first scene to begin the movie. So go there, get ready to listen to some magical classical music in Paris. Now here is the trailer for the film Chevalier.
Welcome to Paris, Joseph.
Monsieur, I fear this will not be a kind place to such a boy.
The boy has talent, but one in particular that is exceptional.
Very well.
I realized the more I excelled, the less I was alone.
You're always so competitive.
The show-off who spoiled Mozart's concert.
May I play with you, monsieur?
Well, I hope this won't be embarrassing for you. Who the hell is that?
You are quite a remarkable man, Joseph. I, Marie Antoinette, Queen of France, hereby anoint you Chevalier.
Any other country, a man of your colour would not be wearing such fine clothes.
One day, the whole world will know me. And of course, the music will be spectacular. Bold.
You don't belong here. You're a party trick. You're a pet, playing the violin, that is all.
You know I am the best.
You are playing a dangerous game, friend.
You forget your place, boy. Break his hands.
This world is painful for us, my son. But there is always the choice to fight.
I'm putting on a concert. Let us fund the revolution.
We cannot afford to make any more enemies.
France is changing.
You could be more influential than you know. Leverage it.
If you take to the stage, you will be erased. There will be no new France. You cannot topple what has been ordained by God.
Not everything is about you people.
I was joyous watching this film. I was angry watching this film. I was in tears watching this film. And as soon as I got in my car, I was blasting his music in my car. A genuinely lovely story of a person who we need to know about to understand the journey the French have gone through historically, and to, as we don't, and I don't think any Francophile does, but to be careful not to slip into it, glorify any one culture as knowing or having been better than they are. The French have their own dirty laundry, and now we do know about Chevalier. All right, so enough. I've gone on and on and on. It's a lovely film. The film is Chevalier. It's in theaters now, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each episode where I'll recommend a book, a film, a show, a recipe, anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. I want to, before I wrap up, I wanted to share with you that, as I mentioned at the top of this episode, British Week is coming up. It's beginning on Sunday, May 21st and running through May 28th. And there will be at least 2 posts every single day for the entire week, all British inspired. There will be 6 giveaways open to all top tier members exclusively. And 1 giveaway will be given to monthly and weekly newsletter subscribers, a subscription that is free. So simply sign up for that, and you'll enter via email when I post the giveaway. It will not be on the blog. As well, I just opened pre-orders for the Royal Sussex trugs that are handmade in Britain that received the royal warrant from Queen Victoria back in 1851. Originally created and made by Thomas Smith. They are still made in Sussex. They still hold his name, and you can pre-order them now through May 7th through the Simply Luxurious Life, and you will receive them by the end of May. This is open to U.S. Customers, because if you live in England or live in Europe, you can get them shipped to you far cheaper than what I can. And I have all the instructions on how to place your order. There are all sorts of different sizes and lengths and styles. I have 3 of them. I love them, and it's something I'm going to try to do each year. As so far, it's been received very well. I've received quite a few orders. And it's a one-time only for this year, though. So I'm only going to make it available, this pre-ordering, for once a year, pre-British Week. So if you want a trug, be sure to check out the post on how to pre-order them. And if you're a top-tier member, you get 10% off the price of the trug. All right, to wrap up, I want to extend with great gratitude, speaking of being a top-tier member, this recent review that was posted by Jennifer in Australia. And she wrote, 5 stars, soothing for the soul. This is my favorite podcast. I have been listening since I think around 2017, and I am a subscriber to Shannon's blog as well. I have to say that the variety of content and intelligent conversations adds so much to my everyday life. I have so much to thank Shannon for. I especially love her monthly A Cup of Moments on her blog, where we can sit down with Shannon and a pot of tea and view a special collection for around an hour. Thank you, Shannon, for taking the plunge into this wonderful world you have created for all of us. And Jennifer, thank you for taking the plunge with me and everyone else around the world that is also part of the top tier community. It is a wonderful, nurturing, uplifting, but also enjoyable place to just be, savor, and find inspiration in each other's unique journeys as we all live simply luxuriously our own way. All right. If you two are enjoying the show, please do leave a recommendation or ranking as you have time and are able and interested. It makes such a positive difference, and I am so grateful to every single one of you who have rated it and reviewed it positively. Thank you so much for your time. Now remember, there are 3 new episodes in May, so this one and 2 more. Why? Because of British Week, and British Week falls later this year, so we have one more coming up on the 17th, but then we have another one coming up a week later during British Week on the 24th. In 2 weeks' time, I have Jen Graneman on the show talking about her new book, Sensitive. It's all about HSP, so highly sensitive persons. She joins me to talk about that. And then during British Week, I have a brand new episode, which will be, as you would imagine, British inspired, and I will leave it at that. So stay tuned, and I do hope you enjoy them. Until then, I'll be on the blog, and I'll be back on the show in 2 weeks' time on the 17th. Thank you for joining me today. Bonjour. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, visit the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life, with the shortened URL tsll.co or thesimplyluxuriouslife.com. For more in-depth exploration of how to cultivate your own unique, simply luxurious life, pick up my new book, which became both a bestseller and #1 new release in France Travel, The Road to Le Papillon, Daily Meditations on True Contentment. Available in all 4 formats for your preferred reading or listening. My first book, titled Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, and my second book, Living the Simply Luxurious Life, are also available in each of the 4 formats. Readers can now join the more intimate The Simply Luxurious Life international community by becoming members of the blog, which offers the benefits of ad-free reading site-wide, unlimited access and exclusive access to content on the blog, such as the monthly A Cup of Moments with Shannon video chat, tours of my home Le Papillon, the monthly What Made Me Smile post, and monthly Ponderings post, as well as the exclusive opportunity to enter all of the giveaways during the annual French and British weeks. To stay caught up on all things Simply Luxurious, the podcast, blog post, the cooking show, and receive exclusive news, as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart each new month, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's free monthly newsletter, arriving on the last day of each month in your inbox. There is also a weekly newsletter, which is also free and arrives each Friday to keep you caught up on the recent weekly posts on the blog. Enjoy with a hot cuppa or cup of morning coffee and stay in the know about all things simply luxurious. Look for 2 new episodes of this podcast on the first and third Wednesday of each month. And until next time, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Thank you for tuning in. Bonne journée.